Proposition 132 calls for a supermajority of 60% approval for any ballot measure that would increase taxes. Joining us now for a debate on the issue, we welcome State Representative Tim Dunn, who supports the measure, and Andrew Shugru with the Arizona Center for Economic Progress, which opposes Prop 132. Gentlemen, good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining us. Tim, we'll start with you. Why is this idea of a supermajority on a ballot initiative that raised taxes? Why is this a good thing for Arizona?
Well, thanks for having me here today. And I think as you look at the size of our state and the increasing number of outside interests wanting to come in and manipulate and put money into initiatives for our taxpayers and try to increase our taxes, I think this protects the pocketbook of the Arizona taxpayer. And I think it's as we become like a petri dish for outside interests, I think it's just important to stand up and say, hey, we're going to make it a 60% threshold instead of 50% plus one.
Andrew, why is it not such a great idea?
Since statehood, Arizonans have voted on ballot propositions to exercise their constitutional right to make decisions that affect their lives. And when the legislature refuses to listen to voters, Arizonans have voted directly to fund things like schools, health care, and early childhood programs. All of these with a simple majority. But now, members of the legislature want 41% of voters to be able to block funding for these shared priorities. Proposition 132 is nothing more than a dangerous power grab that ends majority rule here in Arizona.
Why tax increases and not other issues, no other ballot measures?
Well, that's a good question. That's how my original bill that I put forward was all initiatives. But as we looked through and talked about some of the points that came up, is like, well, you know, as you tie this to the 1992 initiative that was passed by the voters that they wanted to have 2/3 vote required by the legislature to improve a tax increase, we figured that this would be more in line with what the voters have already approved overwhelmingly by 72%. So we modified my original bill to say, hey, let's do it just with taxes because that aligns with what the will of the voters have done in the past.
Andrew, how do you square that with the legislature having to get to the 2/3 majority and citizen initiatives only needing a majority?
Well, the supermajority requirement by the legislature has been an abject failure. We've cut revenues, which has resulted in massive budget cuts for things that Arizonans need to thrive. And so at the same time, it's also created a massively upside down, uneven tax code that benefits corporations and the wealthy in Arizona as a share of their income. And so the supermajority requirement is no model by which to change the Arizona state constitution and restrict Arizonans' right to vote.
The idea that it contradicts the will of the voters, how do you respond to that?
Well, I think I still say this is very complimentary to what the will of the voters have done in the past with 1992 with requiring the legislature, tying the hands of the legislature to 2/3 vote to increase their taxes. They wanted to make sure the legislature couldn't come in and say with a simple majority with a 31-16 and a governor's signature, increase their taxes. So that was the will of the governors. I was willing to put this on the ballot to make sure that we look at the will of the voters to see if they concur with their own will that was done in 1992.
But you mentioned that originally you wanted all ballot initiatives to have this threshold. It's now only for taxes. Does it make sense to single out taxes when the other initiatives don't have to reach that level?
I believe because this is complementary to what the will of the voters have done in 1992 and 1998 on the Prop 108, I believe this is very complementary. And in negotiations, I was willing to change my original bill to say, okay, let's focus on what we saw that the will of the voters have already done, as opposed to having a discussion about all the initiatives and the 50+1 compared to what the legislature done. So it was my compromise, saying let's conform this with what the will of the voters have already been done in 1992.
Tim had referred to special interests and a way to kind of check special interest activity in Arizona, pushing things that come from out of state and may be pushing their agendas and not necessarily Arizona's. How do you respond to that?
I think we really need to cool it on the special interest talk. It's Arizonans who sign the petitions, it's Arizonans who vote on the ballot propositions, and it's Arizonans who reap the benefits. Over the past several decades, we've used the ballot process to increase funding for things that matter to Arizonans. Things like $1 billion in schools, $150 million for healthcare, and $120 million just last year for early childhood programs. With Prop 132 in place, none of that would be possible because none of those received the 60% threshold that was required.
Who are these special interests that we hear about in this particular debate?
Well, we've had some from California coming in trying to, on the energy situation in 2018 and 2020, trying to do additional taxes, additional regulatory burden for for energy. That was the big thing that was stopped in the last election cycle. And then we've also had folks that are working on HSUS, trying to work on different initiatives for animal cruelty and animal husbandry. And so those are the kind of ones that come in and spend a lot of money trying to get signatures, to get things on the ballot. And they were paying outside folks to come in. We've kind of worked on that as far as requiring people to be registered as far as the legislature, but it's when you have people that aren't signed up and working to actually who's collecting the signatures. But those are a couple of the ones that come to mind right off the bat.
Is it healthy to have that kind of special interest activity out of state?
With special interest, let's clarify what's going on here. The ballot measures that make it to the Arizona ballot, when they seldomly do, which you can count the number of times on my hands that tax increases have made it to the ballot in the past 10 years. These interests are the shared values and priorities that Arizonans want. According to the Center for the Future of Arizona, over 80% of Arizonans do not want to see more tax cuts, and they want to see investments in things that matter, like roads, like in firefighters, which is on the ballot this year, which under 132 would require 60%, and as well as healthcare, as well as things like schools. And at the same time, they recognize that our tax burden in this state is low. And so they're willing to use the ballot propositions to use their constitutionally protected freedom to raise taxes by a simple majority.
Is this not a check of special interests and lobbyists at the legislature?
The Prop 132 or?
Yes, Prop 132. I mean, you talk about special interests being checked here as far as citizens' initiatives are concerned, but these folks would likely argue that it's a check on special interests and lobbyists at the legislature. I think
the 1992 initiative process for the 2/3 vote is a check on the legislature, because that requires a 2/3 vote. But this is not. The 60% it does make it harder, but the special interest, you need to make sure that you actually voted for and you overwhelmingly want it. I didn't vote for marijuana, which is not a tax increase, but it overwhelmingly passed because you had people that wanted it to pass. The 2/3 vote requirement in 1992 overwhelmingly passed to put a restriction on limiting the legislature's ability. If you had, and you wanted to have the debate about or the Constitutional Amendment to go back and say, if we pass something with 52%, then the legislature should be able to change it with 52%. But Prop 108 requires a 3/4 vote to only make it make it even further. So you're really tying the hands of the legislature.
How do you respond to that? Apples and oranges.
What this proposition would do is it would freeze Arizonans' ability to reverse this unjust and uneven tax code that we have. Right now, the top 5% of Arizona earners as a share of their income pay half of what the bottom 20% do. And 3/4 of Arizona corporations pay only $50 in taxes a year. That's upside down, and Prop 132 would only further those special interests by inhibiting voters from being able to reverse that system.
And yet, would it not make sense, again, from the other side, to argue that when you are increasing taxes, especially now, we got inflation going on, we got a lot of monetary concerns in a variety of ways, when you are doing that, a broad support, widespread support should be had before you enact these kinds of things?
On the other hand, we're talking about 41% of Arizona voters being able to reject efforts to do this. When we change our Constitution, we only need a simple majority. When we elect our representatives, we only need a simple majority. And actually, in some cases, we only need elected officials can be elected by less than half of the votes cast. This is unfair and unjust in terms of our.
Does it show a lack of trust in people as far as saying you have to get to 60% as opposed to a simple majority?
No, I think this actually instills trust in it. I think when we look, we want to trust our Arizona voters. We don't want to put it in the hands of manipulation from outside interest. I think, we want to make sure that the Arizona voters overwhelmingly do a tax increase. This is not a debate on who pays what taxes and who pays their unfair share. This is a matter of making sure that Arizonans overwhelmingly want a tax increase because the legislature will never be able to change it under the current law.
And yet, as I think you referred to here, Prop 301, Prop 123, using state trust land funding for schools, the education sales tax, early childhood, first things first, education, a variety of these things never would have made it. And people seem to have wanted that, but below that 60% threshold. Is that right? Is that good? When I say right, is that a good thing?
I'm not sure. I'm not saying it would be a good thing that it didn't pass. I voted to extend the Prop 301. So I think if it's pitched to the voters and it's over 60%, then they will pass it. And so I don't think it's a good. I think they will just do a better job of getting the reason for getting those bills passed.
You mentioned your concerns regarding the tax structure in Arizona. There was someone argued that Arizona needs to be a low tax state to remain competitive when attracting business and such. How do you respond to that?
We aren't competitive when our teachers can't afford to live here. And we aren't competitive when we're not using state resources to address the climate and affordable housing crisis that's plaguing our state right now. And we certainly aren't competitive when we're not investing in childcare and providing paid family leave to give families the flexibility and freedom they need to succeed in this economy. Prop 132 would only place additional barriers to achieving that people-first economy that Arizona needs.
Additional barriers. What do you make of that?
I think if it's a good idea, then 60% of the people will vote for it, and like they did with other things that they've passed. I don't think this is a debate about the tax structure that we have. I think we've got a growing economy. I think we can talk about how good things we've done in funding education in the last 2 years, but I think it's not a barrier. I think it will make the bills be stronger and better for Arizonans.
Bottom line, last question. Direct democracy is a part of the Arizona Constitution here. It's our tradition. It's what we do. Do you think that this chips away at that? Critics say that 60% is not the majority. It's not what you work at the legislature, aside from taxes. It's not what you work at there. It's not what we do when we put you in office and other state lawmakers and federal lawmakers. It chips away at direct democracy. Your response?
My response is I trust Arizona voters. I think that when this is specifically for taxes, and when the hand of the legislature is tied to having to only be able to increase by 2/3 votes, and they cannot reduce it with over a 3/4 vote, that this makes sure that all of Arizonans, 60%, want to have this passed, and we trust them.
Should cutting taxes also meet a 60% threshold?
No, sir.
Why?
Because it's not in the statute.
Well, but no. But should the question is, should there be a 60% threshold?
I don't believe it should be. I believe because I believe you're going to vote. You have the ability with the election to elect people and get them in and out of service, in and out of office. So I think if you're managing the state and managing the budget, then we're making sure that we're funding Arizona correctly.
But only for tax cuts and not tax increases.
That's correct.
All right. Bottom line for you, a broad support for a tax increase is needed, and 60% threshold would hit that support, would show that support around the state. Your response?
We've used this power in Arizona for years to make sure that the resources are there for the priorities that Arizonans want. The power is inherent in the people, says the Arizona State Constitution. And if Representative Dunn is being serious about this, he should trust a majority of voters to get this done.
Andrew Shagru and Representative Tim Dunn, good conversation. Good to have you both here. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.